Halo.
Čau, čau.
Var man dzirdēt, jā? Viss kārtībā?
Jā, viss kārtībā.
Kā viss notstāja?
Jā, ļoti labi. Redzu, kā arī Arturs konektējas.
Sveiks.
Čau.
Čau.
Prieks tev redzēt. Finally. Virtuāli ir pat vienkāršāk, vai ne? Satikties.
Jā, bet tāpat tas nav tas, kas tikties to klātienē.
Čau, Juri. Mums jā, sāk cilvēki piebiedroties. Es domāju, ka mēs tagad pieklājīgi pagaidīsim, kamēr cilvēki pieslēgsies. Jā. Es pagaidām vēl izpētīšu, kad es mums te ir iespējas. Es tikai, gudīgi teicot, notestēju, bet visu vēl nē.
Lūdās, vienu lietu paņemšu.
Protams. Tā. Zinu, ka es varu tā darīt.
Tas jau tā advancēti klausies.
Jā. Nē, nu labi. Cilvēki nekauž. Stream. Jā, rekordings. Tā, rekordings mums notiek. Ok. Facebook. Tā, labi. Es tagad vēl vienkārši mēģinu pārliecināties, ka mums viss ieraksti, viss notiek, jo daži cilvēki jautāja, vai būs ieraksts. Ja šoreiz apsolēju, ka ieraksts būs, un tagad vajag nokontrolēt, ka viss pareizi ierakstas. Ok.
Kā jau rāda, ka rakstās un live Facebook.
Jā, to es arī ieliku, jā. Tas ir papildus. Ok, labi. Tā, pirmie 10 cilvēki mums jau piebedrojas. Es domāju, ka mēs varam pakāpeniski sākt. Jā, tā kā...
Droši.
Jā. Tad varbūt vispirms es sākšu ar to, ka es izstāstīšu, tā kā, kāds mums šodien ir plāns, jā, tā kā, un par ko mēs šodien taisamies runāt. Atgādināšu, ka Chi Laiks meetup, jā, tā kā, parasti viss notiek klātienē šoreiz. Pirmā reize, kad mēs esam online. Un īstenībā sanāca pat varbūt tā kā vienkāršāk visu šo noorganizēt. Jā, un es ceru, ka tā arī mums arī tik vienkārši mums arī būs šodien viss tālāk. Tad Chi Laiks meetupos mēs parasti runājam par, teiksim, tā kā mēs apkopējam divas lietas. Jā, tā kā mēs mēģinām runāt par tādu lietu kā izdegumu, jā, tā kā, es tagad padomāju, kāpēc es runāju latviski, jā, tā kā es solīju dažiem cilvēkiem, ka mums vismaz pirmā daļa, man liekas, ka mēs arī ar tevi, Artur, runājam, ka mēs runāsim angliski, jā, tā kā tavu daļu, jā, un tad...
Neatceros, bet varu arī angliski, tā kā...
Yeah, okay. Let's switch to English, because, okay, so, like, we usually we are trilingual, so we basically speaking either English or Latvian, and then we're switching into you know, kind of whatever language, you know, kind of when they're getting the questions. So, you know, answering questions in all three languages: Russian, English, and Latvian. So, but today we will start in English, and today we have two guests. So, just let me kind of, you know, I lost my thought, you know, kind of, and as I started to say, you know, we're talking here about the burnout, about an issue of a burnout, about an issue of stress, and we're talking that not for all the professions, not for all the people, but we actually talking about the digital professions. And the reason of that is basically we want kind of to do a little bit of research. We want to do a little bit of talking about how different the burnout, how different the work stress is for the people in the digital profession. And earlier on the previous three meetups, we were talking that we have this kind of a hypothesis that burnout for the digital professions is kind of different. It's because, you know, originally the burnout subject, the whole concept of a burnout, of course, is was not defined for the digital profession. That was defined for the helping professions, for the people who work in the medicine, and we do understand the root cause of the burnout there. It's basically kind of it comes with a kind of through emotion that people are getting when they're working with their patients, you know, kind of. Then in digital professions, we probably should look for a root of the burnout in something different, because we don't have so many emotions, we don't have so many empathy when we're talking about digital professions, when we're talking about software developers, about, like, you know, people who are doing digital project management. Then despite that, we still see a lot of people who are kind of showing the same symptoms as the burnout. So we actually came up with a kind of a hypothesis that there are very specific reasons why people in digital professions are getting into the burnout. And we were talking about these reasons on the previous three meetups, and we were trying to differentiate where the stress ends and where the burnout starts. And this is what we want to continue today. And this is why we have one of our guests here. We have Arturs Miksons, who is actually kind of quite known in Latvia, at least, for talking on the issue of burnout in a very different formats, you know, kind of separate sessions or on TEDx. And Arturs is a doctor of medicine and a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. So basically kind of this is an expert zone, and he's our guest in an expert zone. So he's kind of talking about this topic as an expert. Then we have also another guest here today, and I'm very proud to have you here today, Alise. Alise Alka is, well, I would say kind of a young digital professional. And, you know, kind of, I'm proud that actually kind of I'm being a recruiter, placed Alise into her first job. And this really was kind of a big success for both us and the client. And the interesting part here is that Alise actually coming from completely other profession. So she recently went through the IT education. There is a great school, Chi, which is doing that. They basically finding talented people who are working in other professions, and they're teaching them to code, to do programming. So, and this is the way how Alise, you know, came into, you know, IT world. And Alise wanted to share her story today. So that's going to be our second part. And then for this part, we will switch into Latvian. But then, I mean, like, you know, for me, this is very kind of interesting part, because, you know, kind of, we kind of, when we talk about a burnout, when we talk about stress, we typically thinking about people who spend, you know, kind of quite a long time in profession, who spent like, you know, kind of a lot of years, and who are really kind of annoyed and you know, kind of who just want to change something in their life. And you know, kind of here we have maybe kind of, you know, kind of another illustration, you know, kind of that, you know, things might be different. It's not necessarily one way how you're getting into burnout. It's not necessarily one way how you're getting into the stress. So, and if you are not in a profession for a long time, maybe it's kind of, you know, not a reason, you know, rejecting yourself to be in a kind of in a stress and in burnout. You should not kind of, you know, ignore the facts, the symptoms. You know, it definitely might be the case. So, but then, you know, if we start talking with you, Artur, now, and maybe kind of, you know, my first question would be like how you kind of how you position, you know, kind of what is a burnout and what is a stress, and what's the difference between these two things?
One thing I would like to clear already in the beginning before we
Sure.
discern things is that definitely there will be, or there are definitely some factors that influence the development or progression of burnout in kind of people who work more in the digital field.
Mm-hmm.
But the burnout itself is no different from anybody else. And that's one thing I wanted to clarify. If we start to talk about stress and burnout, then there is always that aspect of, which I took from one of my teachers who taught me many, many years ago, that if we take a term that is used in a specific group of people, for example, in medicine, if we talk about stress, then more or less every medical doctor knows from a point of pathophysiology and physiology what stress is as a term. What does it mean? How it works? What does it even look like? When this term gets put into public and used in the public kind of everyday social interactions, it's being misused, and a lot. And I see that now in very many articles, starting even with the most simplest things where people say there's good stress and bad stress.
Mm-hmm.
That is just plain wrong. And for the lack of a better word, that's sometimes even bullshit. Because stress is basically a biological, biochemical response to a stressor. Question is that stressor from the external world outside of yourself or from somewhere in you? Is it a process in the brain? Is it a process in the gut, in the lungs, in the heart, somewhere? There's a stressor that needs a response. And stress is that response to that stressor. It's just a biopotential with the intent to react to the stress and to try to equalize all the processes that happened previously to the stressor in your body. Basically, you have to adapt to the stressor. Either you have to be more tense, relaxed, you have to adapt to it somehow. So that's why when people, for example, say in conversations there's good stress and bad stress, they're misusing the term, because stress is not only if you have a chore at work. Stress is not only a conflict with a colleague. Stress is not only if you have to do a project. Stress is also being, all three of us being in this meeting. Every single participant here has stress right now. And I'm not talking about the COVID situation. I'm talking about the actual fact you're sitting here and listening to us, looking at us. That is a stressor for your ears, for your eyes, for your butt sitting on your chair or your sofa. That is a stressor. Question is, how many stressors have been already for you and each and every one of us up until this point that we have to deal with? Is it just simple stressors like, for example, sleep enough, eat enough, drink enough, exercise enough, do our work, be in a relationship, basically stick to all of these kind of aspects. And if we take this concept, as simple as it is, and complex at the same time, we can look at burnout. And burnout is basically a, I would say, end result where you have a certain level of stressors that you try to meet, you try to adapt to, and unfortunately you can't, because they are just too much.
Exhaustion.
The reason why, the reason why, for example, the thing you started with, that burnout was kind of noticed in the beginning, kind of in medical professionals, the idea was that, oh, they're kind of always working with human suffering and they see a lot of people having diseases and dying. That is true. Of course, we see that a lot from day to day, but that's not the only factor, because the question is, for example, I would be able to see 20 patients, you would be able to see 30. Sorry, forgot the name, Alice. Alice, for example, would be able to see 40 patients. And at the same time, for example, I would burn out at 20, you at 30, she at 40. If I want to compare myself to you and try to take up 30, I will burn out even faster because my workload ends at 20. I have to be more or less aware of reality and aware, or basically raise my awareness or consciousness of who I am and what can I do to understand what are more or less my limits. What can I do? But unfortunately, the brain develops in various ways through our lifetime that we unfortunately distort reality. Basically from the development from each and every one of our family development, child development, where we perceive that maybe we do not enough. Maybe we need to do more. Maybe I need to accomplish something. Maybe I need to prove something. And this is where burnout kicks in. For example, for every single medical doctor, you will need to be aware, for example, that this and this many patients burdens me at some point. Yes, I have a profession to help the ill, to help people in need, sure, but I would need to know my limits. That, for example, I can do this and this shift, I can do these and these many patients. If I cannot, I need to be in contact with reality and tell at least myself, I cannot handle this workload. Do I need to try find a way how to maybe relax a bit more, or how to change my job, or maybe to face the reality that I can't do this job? The same thing would apply for experts and employees in the digital marketing or digital field itself, where you have completely different demands. You're not working, I assume, you're not working with people suffering and death from a day-to-day basis, but you have some completely different stressors that we as medics do not. And you have to cope with them somehow, be it finding a specific solution. You still work with people. Noted, you work more, for example, on a computer coding or programming or doing these things, but still you have a team. A team has to work together. There is a team leader, there's a producer, there's somebody who works more with finances, with projects, with something. Question is, does he or she know how much can they do? If they don't realize how much they can do, but only kind of stick to some very nice fantasy idea, what they should do, then it's very easy to get to burnout. Because mostly when I am in some lectures or when I have patients, when they come and say, oh, I'm burned out, what should I do? I would say 95% of cases, they all know what they should do. They just don't want to admit to themselves what they need to do. And mostly in those cases is to drop something. But mostly what happens is, if we take the English saying, we want to have our cake or pie and eat it too at the same time. And unfortunately, that is the most common reason which brings us to burnout. To sum it all up.
So let me just sum it up also kind of how I understood that. So first of all, talking about stress, we're not talking about good and bad stress. We're talking about that the stress is a norm of our life. This is something that we actually experiencing, like, every second, whatever, minute or second. Exactly. And then when it sums up into something, then it might give like, some bad result. And actually kind of sometimes it sum up into burnout. And then you're talking about a burnout as a kind of a result of exhaustion or like a workload that we cannot handle. But is it just a workload issue? Because this is how I understood that this is kind of, this may be like a result of workload, but I kind of, I think we all have
workload. By the workload, I mean not only, for example, that you have let's say, not 5 projects or 7, but for you, these 3 projects, which on paper seem not that much. For example, I would have, let's say today, I would have 3 patients only. On paper, that seems like nothing, like a workload. But I cannot, of course, disclose confidential information, but there's a vast difference. If, for example, I have 3 patients that I have been seeing for the last 3 years, which come on a regular basis, they're developing, we are working through stuff. Working with these patients is a breeze for me, compared to if I have 3 patients, the same amount, 3 patients, but completely new 3 patients. One of them, for example, would have lost their job. One of them, for example, would have seen their relative die recently, and another one would have had a serious diagnosis put onto them. These 3 patients would take much more energy from myself and workload from myself to bear with them. And imagine if I had 8 of these in my day, 10 of these in my day. I need to more or less structure my day to have an idea, or let's say assume what kind of patients I could await. And at the same time, of course, there could be something spontaneous that I can't take into account. So not so much the amount of work that happens, but also how I will feel after these patients.
So the emotional load of this work.
Exactly. Do I feel that, for example, I haven't done enough? Do I feel that I have to, for example, do this work better? Do I have the feeling that, oh, I have to do things for everybody else? On top of that, maybe while we're doing the project, there's misunderstanding in between the team. Maybe there's a quarrel in between the team. Maybe there's some resentment, some competition, some jealousy, some envy in between the team, which is completely normal. It will always be there. But if you don't acknowledge it, you will only act it out in behavior. And then, for example, mostly what I try to tell in every single one of my lectures where I talk about emotions and how they could lead to burnout is that mostly, even though in the society we're kind of posing this idea that we're so preoccupied with making mental health better and so on, that again is a bit bullshit in my eyes. Because we're talking about mental health, but we're not actually talking about how we feel. We want to pinpoint how somebody else feels, not how I particularly feel. And when even where a group works, where we start to feel a bit frightened, a bit agitated, a bit pissed off, maybe, nobody wants to feel that way because that is unpleasant. Why would I? So I will adapt my behavior to feel something different or to feel less of that unpleasant feeling. Question is, for which and every one of us, what will that action or behavior be? Maybe for some person, for example, not to feel in a certain way, I will take up more workload. I will take up a different aspect of the job. I will try to do something else. I will avoid this colleague, but I will work more with this colleague. In order not to feel competition, I will try to do more to supersede this colleague. And the actual end result is not to maybe do better for the company or for the project, it's for me to feel better. And unfortunately, this is where if we get too preoccupied with a certain goal, we don't notice how much it actually is impacting us. I have had so many patients right now, if I just can take one example of COVID, is where patients, of course, now with the whole COVID situation and us being isolated the same way we are now, they're telling me that this kind of first week when the kind of lockdown happened in kind of Riga and Latvia, and they start to talk about I'm kind of having a bit of a week off now because a lot of jobs are canceled for me. And I notice I'm relaxing more. And basically the topic where we got to was that, could it be that the reason why you're so relaxed now is that you didn't even notice previously how loaded you were? That you don't even notice. You take up small amounts day by day, week by week. You take up more, and you don't notice that it's actually impacting you and making you burn out at some point. Because people want to look at burnout as something very fixed. I tend not to do that. I tend to show that it is a very dynamic, progressive process The question is, at which point of, let's say, burnout are you? Are you where you notice that you start to make mistakes, you start to get agitated, you sleep worse, your appetite changes, you change yourself, your personality changes a bit, or where you notice where you're actually getting very sick? Your behavior changes a lot. You start to do very unhealthy habits. You start to smoke more, you start to drink more. You start to find very unhealthy ways how to unfortunately deal with the thing you loaded onto yourself in the first place. Not unloading the things, but trying to find unhealthy ways to cope with it. And that makes the burnout even deeper, unfortunately.
And then if I may ask, I mean, like when we're talking that, you know, kind of the reason for the burnout is the emotional load, basically. I mean, like this is what makes things to be kind of, you know, heavy and complex and unbearable, maybe kind of, then it's not necessarily that the reason for that is lying on the other side. It might be within ourselves, right? I mean, like, for example, if I'm losing interest to my work, you know, for example, if you as a doctor losing interest in your work, even simple kind of clients, you know, the ones you said that you have like established relationship and whom you kind of have a tendency to call more or less, you know, kind of easy cases, you know, for you. I mean, like even those clients will be kind of difficult for you. I mean, like if you're starting to lose interest in what you're doing, right?
Definitely, yeah. One of the kind of signs and symptoms for maybe burnout is that you lose interest in simple things that you did before. We can look at it as a kind of let's say pre-signs or predecessors of maybe some depression creeping up on you or some specific anxieties, true, but you get much more cynical at work than you did before. You look differently at your colleagues, at your clients, at your patients. And it's very important that you notice. For example, it's very good that you brought the example of my, I don't have clients, I have patients. But for example, when I worked with students like 6 months back, and I noticed that I have been, I would say, in states of burnout few times that I care to admit. But that's mostly what my colleagues pointed out to me, that I change, I look different, but I was basically running in a very nice hamster wheel myself, doing a lot of lectures and doing patients and working with students, that I didn't notice how actually loaded I was. And I noticed in myself that something was wrong, that I didn't have the wish to work with my students. I noticed myself waking up in the morning and I noticed I just want to go to the seminar. I have like mostly 2.5 hour free hour seminars with my students. And I noticed I don't want to work with them. I just want to work for an hour and just get out. I don't want to work here. I got myself together. I at least led, I think, 1.5 or 2 hour seminar for them, answered all the questions. I did as good as a job as I could, but I noticed I don't want to. I have this wish to just to leave it all. Just go outside, and I don't want to see you. Just do something. I'll put a video on, just read this textbook and you'll be fine. And at that point, I noticed this is not good. And I took a bit of, I think, 1 or 2 weeks off. Later, I knew I had to kind of finish off my jobs for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I couldn't just leave it at that. I did a bit more, let's say, relaxation through the weekends, and realized that I did that 2-week kind of vacation for myself, after which I tried to organize my week a bit different. Because in those 2 weeks, I looked back at my work previously and I noticed that hamster wheel had gotten so out of control and so had crept up to me so unnoticed, that when I looked through my schedule, I noticed how cramped up it was. And when I was looking at it back then, I realized, well, this is normal. I'm kind of working from 9 a.m. till 8 or 7 p.m. That's a normal work day. At the same time, I'm not at home. I'm not spending enough time with my loved ones. And I didn't notice that kind of for a very long time. And then afterwards, it was a very long, steady process to lessen the work that I do. But it wasn't easy because when you are in this kind of hamster wheel, you, how to say, you help other people adapt to your situation. What I mean by that is everybody was very adapted to, well, Arturs does everything. He does this, he can do a lecture, he doesn't say no to anything. He does everything. And this kind of became a part of my life to some degree. And the aspect basically at some point was that I noticed that I needed to start to learn to say no to a lot of things. For example, if somebody called me and asked me for a seminar or lecture, I needed to weigh out, yes, I can do this time-wise. We talked about workload. I can do this. But if I do this, what do I have to give for it? Do I have to give for it time with my family, with my loved ones, with my friends? Will I be more stressed out during the day because I have to prepare for that seminar? Or do I have the capacity, do I have the energy to do that? And now, of course, I do make mistakes still, but I try to organize my day that I have enough energy at the end of the day to at least have more spare time for myself, not just give it to others.
Okay. But then, you know, kind of you answer it in a way that, yes, it happens that kind of this kind of a result of a burnout when you're losing interest in what you're doing in your work. But we also had like a kind of a hypothesis that sometimes it might be also kind of, well, it's not a hypothesis. I think it's kind of, you know, it's a known case, but that hypothesis is what that it's quite common in a digital profession, because there are kind of a lot of people who came in a digital profession because it's popular, because it's kind of, you know, it's a good place to earn money. I mean, like, you know, we all know that software development, you know, the digital professions are paid well better compared to kind of, you know, basically average and majority of the other professions in Latvia. So a lot of people are going into the digital world just to make money, and sometimes, you know, kind of they go to the university, they don't even think about whether it's something that they want to do for their entire life, and they're starting to do something, and after 5 years they're starting to understand, no, I mean, like it's not something what I want to do. I want to be like a doctor, or I want to be whatever, like, you know, kind of I want to go and work in the zoo, you know, with the animals. But the problem is basically kind of, you know, I already adopted myself to this lifestyle, I adopted to this salary level, you know, kind of etc. And this is kind of a moment of crisis when they kind of starting to be really unhappy about what they're doing. So the first they're losing an interest to what they're doing, and then it ends up with some kind of a burnout, because emotionally it's difficult on a daily basis to force yourself to do something that you don't want to do. So it might be also this way, right?
Of course, it could be in this way, because what happens is that your workload is doubled. What I mean by that, maybe I need to use a bit of a different word, not workload, but your stressor levels, or basically stressors which impact you, are doubled, because you're dealing with not only the actual work you have to do, technically wise, but at the same time, you're using basically all of the mental energy that you have, not only for the work, but for always having that inner conflict. That, do I want to be here or not? No, this is a good job, it pays well, I like the colleagues, but no, I don't like this, and it's that. And you stress yourself out about a thing that concerns you deeply and thoroughly, but you're not doing anything to change it in any way, shape, or form. And of course, that at some point burns you out, because you're maybe preoccupied with trying to resolve your inner conflict, which you're not actually doing. You're only thinking about it and making yourself feel worse. And at the same time, you're mostly what happens coincidentally is that the work that you do technically is impacted. It cannot be not impacted. That is impossible. of course, in the first weeks or months, maybe there is a compensation mechanism in yourself that more or less you can compensate for it. You're innerly battling yourself all the time, but at the same time, you can still do very good work. And that's very good. Question is, when will you break? And you will. Question is, when will that happen? People sometimes call me a pessimist, but I call myself a realist. That every single one of us has that breaking point because of the stressor levels. Like I said, examples of me, you, and Alice. Every single one of us has completely different stressor levels if we are put in different environments. If we put, for example, ourselves in 3 different environments, every single one of us will be the strongest link or weakest link in any one of them. And here it will be the same thing. That's why I said the idea about the cake and pie and having it and eating it too, because I have had a lot of patients where they are struggling this battle of a relationship, a hobby, a job, friendship, family issues, always thinking about it, battling those kind of emotions that arise from it, but not wanting to change, because that will come with a consequence. Of course, if you change a job now, you'll have your dream job, dream profession, but you won't have the colleagues, the space, the salary, maybe, or something different, or something the other way around completely. You will have a much better salary, but you won't have the same colleagues. You won't have the same place where you work. You won't even have the same city, maybe. And that is a completely different ball game. And it's hard. And
it's all about the choice.
Of course. And that choice will always have consequences. It will
Which is a stress.
Yeah, and that is a stressor, because you will have to deal with the loss and the grief. At the same time, you'll have very good outcomes, definitely, from the thing that you do. I have had patients who, it's very nice that you mentioned kind of these, for example, being in the digital world, realize that you don't want to do it and that you want something else. I have had patients who have been in, let's say, more either accounting or, for example, IT professions and so on. And at some point, they get to a point in therapy where they realize that their actual kind of idea was always doing something completely different. But they went into this because somebody told them to, because somebody told them that's the way to go, and so on, and they believed it. And for some period of time, technically that worked because it pays well. They knew how to do their job. They understood perfectly well what the demands were. What should they do? And it worked out. But were they happy? No. And again, that is a choice. You can still do the job from 9 to 5, earn your salary, and not care if you want to do that. And I've had people in these professions that actually take up medicine when they are 30 and over 30, which is not kind of a very kind of common thing to happen, but it does. I have had medical doctors who have finished medical studies. They have a specialty. They have worked in that specialty for many years, and they are about 35, 37, and they drop all of it to go into the digital profession. They still have the medical background, which they can very nicely use. They're still in the compounds of medical technology, but more from a programming coding standpoint, because that's what they realized at some point they like much more. It was a very hard step for them. It wasn't easy for them to make. But I noticed beforehand that it seemed very frightening that they will have to make this choice. But one thing that happened, I think, in the first months, of course, there's that euphoria when you change anything. But later on, 6 months pass, a year passes, and they earn even more money than they realized. Both the examples that I said, they feel much better. They don't burn out as much. Their relationships improve and their health improves, which in the beginning seemed a kind of oddball, that will never happen.
Talking about this break point, I mean, like, you just mentioned a few minutes ago that kind of, it's just a matter of time to be kind of, and it's kind of in majority of cases when people kind of feeling the approach of the break point, it will happen. So how bad it might be, because I mean, like one of the guys who was kind of, he was not yet speaking, you know, on meetups, but he was one of the kind of guys who influenced me for these meetups. I've listened to him. His name is Edgar Litinskis. He's kind of managing Dev Club, kind of the community for the developers. And he was telling about his personal case of the burnout, and he was kind of telling how this happened. And the main message of his kind of talk was that broken is broken. He was saying that basically, if you kind of, you know, if you manage to break yourself, if you manage to go into the burn down, I mean, like it's very difficult. You know, well, basically, you're never going to be the same after that. So you always will feel that you had this kind of you know, breakdown in the past. So basically, you need to take care about yourself. You need kind of, you know, to start be more you know, kind of attentive to yourself. You have to start noticing the symptoms and the approach of the next, you know, kind of breakdown. So from your perspective, how dangerous this burnouts might be, and like, you know.
Well, if we look at it from a standpoint of kind of a more emotional expression, then every single emotion that we have has kind of three components. One is the mental psychological component, that you notice that you're angry, happy, joyful, afraid, resentful, anything. Every single one of these same feelings will have a physiological component, which I told you about, which is basically a reaction in your body, which produces specific biochemicals and enzymes and so on. And the third one is behavior. The question is, which ones will be the first ones for you individually, which under a specific stressor count change first. For example, there are people who don't either notice specific symptoms that they have, or they have such a high stress tolerance, they don't develop any symptoms, but their behavior changes very rapidly. For example, they start to make many mistakes, they start to get a bit more agitated, more stressed out, more scared, something changes.
Or cynic.
Sorry?
Or more cynical, kind of less.
Or more cynical, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, you're very much right. Some people won't have, for example, such a change in behavior, but they will start to have symptoms. It could be a sleep disorder that they start to develop, not necessarily already a disorder, but impacted sleep, impacted appetite, impacted, for example, sports performance that they notice. They just notice that maybe they have some weird heart palpitations from time to time. They start to notice tense muscles here. That's a job for physical therapists right now, like this. And if you ignore these, then they get worse. They get more and more and more prone to develop to maybe something more serious. And basically, if we look from a medical standpoint, that in the beginning, these symptoms are functional in nature. What does that mean? That the physiology changes a bit. Basically, it's impacted, but it can return to its normal state because it's just functional in nature. For example, it's the same thing if you, for example, take a rubber band, you stretch it out, you let the tension go, it comes back, it's the same as it was. If we take the same rubber band example, imagine if you kind of stretch it out, you hold it. If you just hold it and let it back, nothing will change. But imagine in the very middle, when you're stressing it out, you make a small cut there. If you still keep holding it, you will notice it starts to tear a bit. The same thing happens in your body. You have specific limitations how long that function could be changed. And at some point, it starts to make a organic change. For example, in the beginning, it's just a muscle tension. It's just your, for example, arteries or veins just constricting, and that's it. And nothing bad happens. But after some period of time, well, the inner walls of the artery of the vein get worn out. They get very stiff. They're not that elastic anymore. So that changes your blood pressure. That changes your heart rate. That changes your breathing. That changes how much energy you need to use now to alleviate the muscle tension, for example. Or you start to develop gastritis symptoms, stress ulcer symptoms, and so on. And again, you can come back from these, but that has already made a organic change to one of your organ systems, that is much more severe now. Still, to some degree, you can come back from it. Question, of course, is how deep of a impact, how deep of a damage has that made already? And if you notice which sort of symptoms are more prone to be shown for you, you can use that as a marker for yourself. For example, you start to notice that your first thing that gets impacted is sleep. Somebody else is their appetite. Somebody else notices their behavior. And when you are aware of this, you start to notice your sleep change. You start to think, not necessarily thinking it's burnout, but is this the workload? Is this something just in my relationship? Is this something about me, my existential issues? What is it that is impacting me right now? Why I'm not sleeping good? Because you have eradicated, for example, all of the typical patterns. For example, you go to bed at normal hours, you don't use any smart devices with the blue light and everything, you don't eat at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., you exclude all of these, and you still don't sleep well. You can't fall asleep until 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Something is off somewhere. And if you disacknowledge that all the time, you think like, I'll watch a movie, something. If you do it 1-2 times or a week, that's nothing bad. If you have done that for the last 3 months, something is way off. And that is a overlap, which I told you about the breaking point. You have an inner conflict, which you have to resolve. You have the workload, the work that you have to do, demands you have to fulfill at your workplace. And at the same time, you're getting less sleep. So it's only a matter of time where you break down even more. So it means you'll sleep even less, even worse. The quality of the sleep will deteriorate. It means only you will get more agitated. You'll get more stressed out about your inner conflict. And that will make even more mistakes in your workplace. And mostly people try to do what? They try to only fix the sleep. That's not the issue. Of course, that's one thing you can try to fix in the beginning. Of course, if patients that I see say that they haven't been sleeping for the last 2 weeks normally, of course, I prescribe some sleeping pills, but not with the intent of long-term use, but with the intent of having just 1 or 2 nights good sleep for them to just recuperate a bit. And I would say if we are in this very beginning of functional symptoms, we can see that as something is wrong. We try to fix what's underneath that, and we can get better. I don't want to say fast, but we can get better. If we have already gone to the point where maybe we have, let's say, hurt ourselves quite badly, that could have a long-term impact. For example, if for example, if I would be a person who alleviates only stress, again, that's a weird thing to say, by doing sports. You can't alleviate stress by doing sports, you're doing more stress. But basically you're alleviating some maybe emotional burden that you have. At the same time, you're strengthening your muscles at the same time.
Oh no, but this sport is like a kind of predictable stress, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I'm elevating some unpredictable stress with more predictable stress.
True, but at the same time, I could be not noticing that the actual sport that I do burdens me as well. For example, that I don't stretch enough after a sport. I don't take enough liquids. I don't take enough proteins, carbohydrates, or something for that sport. And I disacknowledge the symptoms that have already begun to happen, not only because of the workload and the inner conflict, but because of the sport. And if it just sums up in me having tense muscles, that's functional in nature. But if that happens to end up me breaking a tendon, tearing a tendon, me breaking a muscle, me breaking, not breaking, but tearing, for example, or breaking a joint, that's already not functional in nature, that's organic in nature, that will need surgery, that will need something more, and that will have a long-term impact on you later down the road.
I can't kind of avoid kind of getting back to the topic that you actually raised when we were preparing for the last meetup, when actually the one that you had to skip. So you actually wanted your talk to be kind of announced as a kind of called as a burnout is overrated. So now by hearing what you're saying, I'm kind of, I'm still hearing that the burnout is kind of, well, it might be not a plague, it might be not like, kind of, pandemic, but it's like, or actually it is maybe, but it's not so serious as some, pandemics, but, kind of, it still sounds quite serious. I mean, like, it still sounds like something that can kind of crush people, that's something that can kind of, destroy their social life, destroy their professional life. So how this goes together with the statement that the burnout is overrated?
What I mean, what I wanted to say in the last meetup, which I unfortunately could not attend, was that people see burnout as a cause, not as a result of something. And that is a big problem, because if you see burnout as, for example, oh, I have burnout, what do I do with the burnout? You don't have to do anything with the burnout. That's the issue. That's what I want to talk about, why it's overrated. You need to look for what caused the burnout, not what it actually is. For example, if you want to look at what burnout is for you specifically, maybe it's a agitated behavior, you're not sleeping well, or you're getting very cynical. You getting less cynical, sleeping better, and getting less agitated will not resolve your burnout. It will just resolve the symptoms of the burnout that you have. You will, if you don't realize that you have an inner conflict, that you have a problem at your work, with your relationships, your marriage, your kids, your parents, something, if you don't acknowledge this as a problem, burnout will not end.
And take responsibility for this.
Exactly. And people mostly want to find a miracle pill, miracle cure, something that will take the burnout away. Same idea about the cake and eating it, that I will bring, for example, my burnout to you, Alex. You will tell me what I need to do without changing anything in my life to take away my burnout. How exactly are you going to do that?
Not making choice.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. And you will basically more or less will tell me, well, Arturs, well, I see a problem here, here, and here. You need to make a choice. I mostly will say, oh, I don't want to make a choice. Take my burnout away. Every single patient that I have had who has had burnout gets to this conclusion. Some of them make the choice and change something in their lives. Others, unfortunately, leave therapy and don't come back because they hope I can give them something or say a miracle phrase that they will not have to deal with a choice, with the consequences of that choice, and at the same time, they will eradicate the burnout. I'm sorry, dear friend, but that will not happen. And that is something very open that I say, that unfortunately you will have to make a change. You don't have to make a radical change if you don't want to. You can make a very small one that impacts maybe a small portion of your life. And maybe that will be enough to at least make you a bit more stable. That impacts your daily life much better. You don't have to go completely 180 degrees in the other direction. You don't have to be that radical. But people sometimes see that either I have this or I have nothing at all, and I will have that. That's a very kind of very polar thinking, very black and white.
Great. So basically, you're saying that we are overrating burnout as something like external, as an outer force, and
exactly.
And kind of burnout. It's not a virus. It's not something that kind of just infecting us. It's something that kind of going from inside, and we totally can and should control it, like by ourselves.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. You said a very nice phrase that people want to see burnout as something very from the outside, not from the inside. And if you see it more or less from the outside, that you think just changing something in the outside and not changing anything in myself, in my views, actions, my thinking, then nothing will change. Of course, in some coincidences, you kind of change only the outer world. That changes some aspects which impacted you, and think, oh, see, I didn't have to change anything in myself. I don't have burnout now. Well, yeah, that's a very nice coincidence that happened, but that's not a treatment method. That's not something that should be used.
And this is something that we already discussed in one of the previous meetups and also with employers. And by the way, I see there is a question from on this. Guys, by the way, don't be shy and ask questions to Artur. So the question from on is I cannot read it like it's a big question now. So but it's actually about kind of, you know, how we as employers should be working with our employees individually to support them in harder times. But you know, kind of the way how we discussed that before, actually, that of course many people do see kind of the burnout at the workplace as an employer responsibility, which is partially true because, you know, kind of employers of course may kind of, you know, create the culture which will be very kind of toxic and will kind of, you know, really kind of, you know, catalyze the burnouts. But I mean, like, you know, I think we still need to kind of to have this very strict border between the responsibilities, and every person should hold primarily his own responsibility for his own burnout, even if it's kind of catalyzed by the workplace, by the employer. I mean, like, you still have this choice of, you know, changing employment, you know, changing profession, changing your lifestyle, changing your, you know, kind of attitude to the work, changing your, you know, way how you communicate with the colleagues, etc., etc. So it's a personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I can add here, I have to say, I have 7 more minutes and then I have to end for today. But I have had this question asked many times from various corporate companies to me also. And there I always say the same thing, that upper management, or basically the leadership in the company, is not solely alone responsible for the burnout of their employees, but they can very much contribute to that if they are not aware what they do themselves as employers of employees. And basically what they can do to alleviate that is, first of all, having very understandable rules, regulations, and very understandable and even better off written demands, what they want from their employees. If it's something very kind of mostly what some employers say, oh, it's self-explanatory. No, nothing is self-explanatory. You need to understand and tell directly what you await from your employees, what you await, what they will do, how much will they do, and how that work will be done. Mm-hmm. At the same time, for example, you say what you want, what you expect, what your expectations are from the employee, and then you see what they can do. Can they do this or not? If not, you make a choice as an employer. Do you want to help them? Do you want to manage them somehow? Do you want to support them or not? That is a choice you need to make. If you don't want to make that, if you don't want to support them, then don't. You fire them basically because right. You want kind of super soldiers kind of in your workplace. At the same time, trying to be empathic and helping out. There was a question here from Andis about, for example, if somebody has a episodic depression. Okay, you can be understanding to some level, to some degree. For example, I have had, for example, a few colleagues of mine who I'm kind of helping out when they're studying now to be psychotherapists as well. And kind of, I noticed at some point that something is off, that they are not working that well with patients, with students, something is off. And when I talked to one of them, that they were quite open and said that their actually grandma or granddad had died. And of course I realized this is a stressful moment in their life. And I say, okay, then let's take kind of 2 or 3 weeks off. You work a bit less with patients, less with students. You still do some day-to-day work. If you notice that this is too much, then we see maybe you even completely skip work. But after that, you come back. If you need someone to talk to, somebody to explain these things or so on, we can do that. And you kind of are forthcoming and help this person out. But if, for example, you have a colleague or employee at work who has problems all the time with somebody in their family, in their relationship somewhere, and they're not doing anything about it, and being all the time very stressed out and panicky and depressive and always saying, oh, I have a problem, then you can simply ask, well, is there something that I can help you with or something that you will do? and you notice that the employee changes nothing in what they are doing, that is not an excuse for them not to do the work that you expect from them. And again, there needs to be some level of communication between the employee and the employer, what they expect and what the employee more or less understands. Can I achieve this or not? There is no, I would say, excuse just saying, oh, I have depression. That is not an excuse. That you could have depressive episodes and sometimes that relates to your work. Okay, we can take that into account. But still, this is expected of you in the workplace. If, for example, you can't meet these expectations, unfortunately, maybe that means that you cannot work here. And that is not a simple thing where people say, oh, you're excluding people with mental illness. No. I have specific expectations for the company, for the work that we do. You can be in a different position. You can be in a different project. But if you know you can't meet these demands, then I have to compromise my own company right now. And then you have to make a choice as an employer. If you want to compromise on the company, you can do that.
Just using your last minutes in this session, I mean, like, you know, kind of, I have to ask this question about the current situation that we are all in. I mean, like, you know, kind of sitting in this kind of isolation. How do you think this adds up into kind of, you know, into the issue of our regular stress and burnout? I mean, like, I've heard like some versions that, you know, on the one hand, it might actually kind of be like, you know, kind of the other kind of stress that will just kind of make the previous stress, you know, kind of softer and then will override basically. And then some people are saying that, okay, it will make things even worse, you know. So what do you think for people who are already in a kind of stress and burnout, like let's not use the word stress, but, you know, kind of in a burnout, you know, kind of this kind of rapid changes, these changes that are happening to all of us, all this uncertainty and anxiety that people, you know, kind of feels and fear, you know, kind of what it might kind of do with the people who are already in a difficult condition.
A short answer would be that definitely this specific stressor of COVID and all these self-isolations and losing jobs and salary changes and so on, of course, will impact people. And I don't want to use the word maybe burnouts, but that will definitely impact their mental health, maybe make them more agitated, more anxiety filled, more depressed, which will lead to other consequences. For example, less motivation to find a job, more interrelationship conflicts, more conflicts at the workplace, more conflicts society-wise, which does not help the market, which doesn't help any job progression. At the same time, there will be, I would say, a much smaller number, much smaller number of people for whom, like I said, this specific COVID situation actually takes away some responsibilities or burdens that they have very externally, like we talked about previously, very externally takes these things away and they will be actually relieved. Will they understand this, that, oh, this COVID situation a bit opened my eyes, that I have been working too much, I have done a bit too much, and they will realize that they have to change their lifestyle a bit. But if it takes it away from them, they just relax for a month, 6 months, a year, and get back to the same thing they were doing, that will be a bit sad.
So basically, kind of, you know, this COVID situation, it might be quite an experience which might help us to actually realize, you know, kind of a lot of different things and understand, you know, kind of what was happening in our lives. Yes. I was just listening before this session to a couple of guys talking about this kind of one guy was called Ernesto Spinelli, and he was saying it's a huge experience, but unfortunately it came us in a way that we were not expecting. It's happening too fast and too kind of, you know, we were not waiting for that just now. Yeah, this might be kind of an experience that people are kind of waiting for years, but they kind of preparing themselves for that. But now it's happened, like, you know, kind of out of nowhere. And this is kind of, you know, the complex part of that, you know.
And for this reason alone, that's why this unexpected chain of events will definitely throw a lot of people under the bus and into the water very unexpectedly. And unfortunately, some of them will not know how to swim, unfortunately. We have to accept that reality, but we can try to help them the best way we can. And at the same time, others who do know how to swim or have a life raft maybe will see other aspects of life, which maybe they will have a finally have a nudge, a kind of push to finally do something. Unfortunately, there had to be a COVID for them to do that. That's a bit of the sad part.
So we should be attentive to ourselves and to the people around us.
Definitely. Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, I have to end for today, not to reach burnout. Kind of practice what I preach myself.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Artur. I mean, I hope there will be also questions after the session, and I will pass it to you, and we will find a way how to bring answers back to the audience.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for joining us today, and I hope we will see you once again later. And so, take care.
Okay, and best of luck to you and Alice in the continuation of the webinar.
Okay. Thanks, Artur.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining. Labi, tad mēs turpinām tālāk. Un tad Alise, tu sagatavoji mums savu stāstu.
Jā, man arī ir savējais stāsts. Man ir manējais stāsts, ko es vēlos pastāstīt par to, kad es sapratu, kad man jau ir tiešām nepieciešama palīdzība, kad man bija mana pirmā tāda trakā izdegšana un kā es ar to cīnos un kā es jūtos šobrīd. Un kā arī par to, kas man palīdz. Jā, tā tad es tad pastāstīšu par to, kā man tas izdevās izdegt. Es to sapratu tajā mirklī pēc būtības, kad jau man bija ļoti, ļoti slikti. Tas bija pagājušā gada rudenī, tas bija oktobris, novembris. Jā, es tieši jau aptuveni kādu pusgadu strādāju savā jaunajā darba vietā. Bet tas nebija tik ļoti saistīts ar darbu, bet savā ziņā, jā, tas arī ietekmēja. Tāpēc, ka es vienmēr esmu bijis tāds cilvēks, kas ļoti, ļoti daudz ko grib izdarīt, daudz ko grib paņemt uz sevi. Plus vēl tieši pagājušā gada rudenī man kaķis nomira un es pēdējos 2 mēnešus atdevu savu enerģiju, savus nervus, pilnīgi visu viņam, ka es jūtos pat tik slikti, kad es ņēmu jau brīvdienas darbā, es nevarēju aiziet uz darbu, jo es gribēju labāk palikt mājās. Un jā, viss sākās ar to, ka es sākumā domāju, ka man vienkārši kaut kas ķermenī nav kārtībā, kāpēc man tā sāp galva, kāpēc es tik ļoti nometusies svarā, kāpēc man negribās ēst. Es iesgāju pie visiem iespējamiem veselības ārstiem, pārbaudīju sevi no pirkstu galiem līdz matu galiem, man ķermenis bija perfektā kārtībā. Līdz es biju aizgājis pie savu pēdējā doktora, kur viņš vienkārši pateica, bet Alise, tu esi ļoti izdegs, esi acīm redzams, jo tev visi rezultāti ir ļoti labi. Tu neesi domājis vienkārši aiziet pie psihoterapeita. Un tad es sāku to domāt visiem apstākļiem, kā es vispār tajā mirklī jūtos un kas ar mani dzīvē ir noticis. Un es tiešām sapratu, tā ir man tāda vienīgā lieta, jo es pati vienkārši netieku galā ar šī brīža situāciju. Un jā, es jau no novembrā eju psihoterapijas tādu kursu, terapiju, kurus reizi 2 nedēļās apmeklēju psihoterapeitu. Bet kā es vispār līdz tam nonācu, jo tas pēc būtības bija tikai tāds punkts uz i. Es pēc būtības vispār esmu bijis tāds cilvēks, kuram ir paticis vienmēr paņemt atbildību uz sevi, ļoti daudz ko darīt, man vienmēr bijis ļoti grūti pateikt nē. Man tas, godīgi sakot, ir jau vairākus gadus. Man arī pēc būtības es neesmu nekad tā dzīvē zinājis to savējo mērķi, ko es tikai gribu darīt, kas tas būtu. Es tikai aptuveni zināju tās lietas, kas man patīk. Un tāds jau mans pirmais stress, godīgi sakot, sākās 17 gados, tāpēc, kad mana mamma aizbrauca uz Angliju strādāt, tāpēc, kad vairs finansiāli ģimene nevarēja nodrošināt, un tēvs mums arī nebija tāda ļoti lielā finanšu atbalsta sistēma. Un es paliku vienā mājās ar savām 2 māsām, man bija 11. klase. Un es tiku tā kā ļoti ātri iemesta pieaugušo pasaulē, bet es vēl biju bērns. Es neko nezināju. Es nezināju, kā pareizi uztaisīt tēstu, bet es to centos darīt. Man bija jāmācās, man bija ļoti daudz jāmācās skolā, plus vēl es gribēju satikties ar draugiem, iet ārā. Man bija ļoti daudz interešu, bet man bija visu laiku tie pienākumi, kas man vienkārši bija jādara. Un tas jau bija tāds sākuma posms, kad es vienkārši sāku mazāk domāt par sevi, bet kas ir jādara tā, lai citiem būtu labi. Arī pēc 12. klases atceros pabeidzu, es aizbraucu un 1 gadu es strādāju Anglijā. Es nezināju īsti, ko darīt, bet es domāju, tas būtu ļoti labs variants, tāpēc, ka es sapelnīšu naudu, es atbraukšu atpakaļ un es to naudu varēšu ielikt savās interesēs. Bija tā, ka es nostrādāju to gadu Anglijā. Es godīgi sakot, vēl aizvien īsti nezināju, ko es vēlos darīt, bet man vecmama atgādināja, kad es biju jaunāka, ka man vienmēr bija sapnis kļūt par frizieri. Man bija tāds, ok, labi, iešu un mācīšos par frizieri. Es veselu gadu nomācījos frizieru skolā, ļoti daudz strādāju, praksējos. Man bija no visa kursa visvairāk prakšu stundas savākts. Es biju viscītīgākā, visstrādīgākā studenta tur, kas vien varētu būt. Bet es tik daudz darīju, bet es sapratu to, ka tā nav mana tā kaisla, tas nav tas, ko es gribu darīt. Un pēc gada nomācīšanās frizieru skolā es domāju, es gribu kaut ko vairāk ar galvu domājuši padarīt. Es atceros, man skolā padevās matemātika. Iestājos Latvijas universitātē, es pusgadu nomācījos matemātikas statistiku. Es pēc pusgada pati labprātīgi aizgāju. Jo es sapratu, ka tas arī nav tas, ko es vēlos darīt. Un tad es vienkārši atgriezos atpakaļ strādājot par frizieri. Un es vienkārši to darīju. Man tas īsti nepatika, bet es domāju, kaut kā sevi jāpušo uz priekšu tajā vienā sfērā. Bet tā bija tāda vairāk tāda piespēšana, jo es vienkārši nezināju citu, ko es gribu darīt, jo man arī, kā jau es teicu, ka es mācījos to matemātikas sastiku, man bija tāda vilšanās, kad man tas īsti nepatika. Un es nezināju vienkārši, kas man patīk. Es arī tik daudz ko dzīvē nebiju izmēģinājusi. Un tad jau bija 17. gada beigas, kad man viens pazīstams vīrietis, kurš man pašai dzīvē ir daudz ko palīdzējis, piedāvāja darbu. Viņš bija atvērsis sev kafejnīcu Vecrīgā. Un viņš zināja, ka es paralēli vēlos piepelnīties, tāpēc, kad es ar saviem to, ko es strādāju frizētavā, es nevarēju nopelnīt tā, lai es varētu dzīvot, bet vairāk es izdzīvoju ar to naudu. Man bija tāds, es paņēmu viņu piedāvājumu, sākt strādāt šajā kafejnīcā Vecrīgā. Man bija ļoti daudz pienākumi, bet tas laikam man bija tāds punkts, kad es sapratu, kad es sāku izdegt un kad es iespējams nekad dzīvē nevēlos sastrādāties kopā ar labiem draugiem, jo šis mans labais draugs, viņš bija kafejnīcas īpašnieks, viņš pārvērtās par ļoti lielu monstru, man liekas, manās acīs. Mēs strādājām, bija 2 pavāri, mēs bijām kādas 5 meitenes, mums bija katrai pienākumu tik daudz, tā kā mums piederētā kafejnīca. Mums vienkārši bija tas biznes jābīd uz priekšu, jādomā par pasūtījumiem, kā piesaistīt klientus. Mums vienmēr bija jābūt smaidīgām, viss jābīd uz priekšu. Un paralēli es vēl strādāju salonā. Un es vēl paralēli domāju, kas man ir jādara, lai man tur viss izdotos, un lai es būtu laba, lai man tur būtu klienti. Un es laikam ar šiem 2 darbiem es ļoti sāku izdegt, un par cik arī mums tas kafejnīcas īpašnieks bija tāds, viņš nāca uz kafejnīcu, un tā viņam bija slikts garstāvoklis, un viņš mums ļoti bieži pārmetā, mūs nosauca dažādos lamu vārdos, un ka man bija tik daudz darba, man nebija vienkārši laika pievērsties tam, kas notiek manī, jo es vienkārši darīju. Tas vienkārši bija tāds sprints manā dzīvē. Kad es tiešām sev automātiski man tika ieskaidrots, ka es neesmu laba, es esmu slikta, un man ir jādara vēl vairāk. Man ir vēl vairāk jācenšas, man ir vēl vairāk sevi jāpušo, lai es pierādītu, ka es esmu labi, ka es kaut ko varu izdarīt. Un tas arī bija tas, ko es darīju. Man bija tiešām ļoti, ļoti daudz mājiņu, protams, paralēli vēl darbs salonā. Es strādāju pat 2 nedēļas bez apstājas, ka man bija pa 3 dienām vienkārši 12 stundas pēc kārtas darbs jāstrādā. Un es to darīju, jo es gribēju pierādīt, ka es esmu laba, un lai man neviens neko sliktu nevarētu pateikt. Un tas bija mans tāds pirmais izdegšanas posms, kad es tiešām izdegu, es nācu mājās, es raudāju, es jutos iztukšota. Es negribēju nevienu to runāt, jo es visu laiku sev teicu, nē, Alise, tu pat esi vainīga, tev tas ir jādara, tev neviens neko nepalīdzēs. Es jutos ļoti viena tajā mirklī, es atceros. Es pazaudēju 15 kilogramus vēl. Es biju ļoti, ļoti lielā stresā. Un tieši tas bija 18. gada pavasaris. Es iepazinos ar savu draugu tajā laikā. Es nezinu, kā man tas izdevās, jo es biju tajā laikā, teiksim tā, ļoti, ļoti izdegusi, ļoti, ļoti depresīva, bet es iepazinos ar viņu, un pēc 3 mēnešiem, protams, ar savu draugu palīdzību, es aizgāju prom no tā darba. Un es nezinu, kāpēc es tajā vietā nostrādāju 7 mēnešus. Es 7 mēnešus bez mazai 1 dienā pacietu to visu izturēšanos, 7 mēnešus sev katru dienu vienkārši pušoju, gribēju iet uz priekšu, es vēl paralēli apmeklēju sporta zāli, lai es justos labi savā ķermenī, bet es biju vienkārši nodedzināta, nedomāju, nekā es ēdu. Es vispār nedomāju par savu mentālo veselību, negribēju nevienu runāties, es tikai strādāju. Gāju sporta zāli, gāju salonu, strādāju. Jā, un tad es aizgāju prom no tās kafejnīcas, jā, man vēl palika salonā darbs, bet un es biju iedomājusies, ka tagad es tiešām mīlēšu savu frizieru darbu. Un tagad būs tas punkts, tā tieši bija 18. gada vasara. Un es vienkārši sēdēju dīvānā un man vispār neko negribējās darīt. Es vēl aizvien, es nezinu, vai es jutos labāk, es varbūt jutos labāk, tāpēc es aizgāju prom no tā darba, bet es jūtu, ka kaut kas manī nav iekšā kārtībā. Nav kaut kas līdz galam, un es nezināju, kas tas ir. Bet es kaut kā tajā mirklī vēl nebiju iedomājusies, ka man vajadzētu apmeklēt psihoterapeitu, vai arī, ka tā būtu izdegšana. Un jā, bet es turpināju strādāt salonā. Es vēl paralēli piestrādāju evolūšanā, tāpēc, ka man vajadzēja paralēli līdzekļus, ar ko nopelnīt. Un tad es jau 18. gada beigās, 19. gada sākumā, atkal mainīju savu profesiju uz programmētāju. Un sanāk, ka man visu laiku ir bijusi tāda profesija maiņa. Īsti nezinu, kas man patīk. Vienkārši kaut kur skriešana, kaut kur iešana, kaut kā darīšana. Un visu laiku liekas, ka kaut kas ir jāmaina. Un visu laiku likās, ka kā pirms tam Arturs stāstīja, kad būs tās apkārtējās lietas, kas man palīdzēs justies labi. Un jā, es mainīju savu profesiju. Es godīgi sakot, es ļoti, ļoti priecīga, jo es arī strādāju salonā, es sapratu to, ka es neesmu varbūt tāds cilvēks, kas tik ļoti var visu laiku runāties cilvēkiem. Es esmu mazliet noslēgtāka. Un jā, es māja pēdējā nedēļā strādāju salonā, un ar jūnija sākumu sāku jau strādāt uzņēmumā par programmētāju. Un tad es sapratu, viss neko citu tagad nedarīšu, man programmētāja darbs būs mans vienīgais darbs. Jo atalgojums arī bija labs, un es ar to visu varu izdzīvot, un man tas viss ļoti apmierina. Man ir beidzot jāsāk koncentrēties uz šo vienu lietu manā dzīvē. Un jā, es strādāju, man viss ļoti, ļoti patika, bet kaut kā tās visas lietas, kas ar mani bija notikuši pirms tam, viņas visas ļoti, ļoti velkās līdzi. Tas nav tā, ka tu nomainīsi darbu, kaut vai tu paņemsi vienu. Tas nav tā, ka es jutos fantastiski labi. Un ne jau tajā darbā ir vaina. Es sapratu to, ka kaut kas manī nav, kaut kas vienkārši nav kārtībā. Man bija ļoti, ļoti slikta pašsajūta. Es esmu no tiem cilvēkiem, ja man tāda sliktāka pašsajūta, es sev ņemu vairāk pienākumus, vairāk darbu, lai es justos labi, lai man būtu tāds, jā, es esmu daudz izdarījis, jūtos ļoti labi. Tā es dažreiz kaut ko nevarēju izdarīt termiņos, kā es sev biju apsolījusi. Man parasti, ja tās jau bija kā tādas sekas, jo tā, es kaut ko jau nevarēju izdarīt termiņos, un parasti parādījās tāds iekšējs liels stress, tāda trīcoņa, es vienkārši jūtu, kā man sirds tauzās. Es skatījos YouTube video, es atceros pa darbā mājās, skatījos, kā sevi nomierināt, ja tev sākas tādas ļoti lielas stresa situācijas. Un tad jau pienāca šitā iepriekšējais rudenis, kad es sapratu, ka es neko negribu apkārtējo mainīt savā dzīvē, man ir jāstrādā tikai ar sevi. Bet man tā izdegšana sajūtās bija tiešām tāda traka, jo man bija visas panikas lēkmes, man bija bezmiegs, es atceros, es raudāju, es kaut kur biju iesprūdis, es kaut ko nevarēju izdarīt. Es atceros, es arī nakts vidū vienkārši, es piecēlos, man iestājās kaut kāds stress, un stress bija par to, ka vai nu es darbā kaut ko neesmu izdarījis, ka es priekš sevis neesmu izdarījis to, ko es gribēju izdarīt. Tā bija neapmierinātība par sevi, ko padomās citi, un ar to man sākās stress. Es tiešām naktīs cēlos ar tādām panikas lēkmēm. Es atceros, bet es tagad ļoti priecīga, un pēdējā panikas lēkme bija decembrī pirms Ziemassvētkiem, un man arī daļai to palīdzēs psihoterapeits, pie kura es eju, jo mēs ļoti, ļoti daudz runājam par manām emocijām, un tieši ar lietām, kuras man jāsāk risināt, un kuras, teiksim, tā ir mazliet manī saplīsušas, un viņas ir vienkārši jāsalāpa, lai es varētu normāli tā kā ikdienā dzīvot. Un arī tas, kā man tā visa izdegšanā, vēl viens tāds punkts, kā man mazliet sākās. Bija tāpēc arī, kad es kaut kā savā dzīvē, kad es biju jauna, man kā 19, 20 gadi, es izdomāju, ka es jau biju noteikusi augstus standartus. Man tie standarti bija tādi, ka es jau izveidošu perfektu ģimeni, man būs ļoti labs amats darbā, es būšu kaut kas augsts, plus man paralēli jābūt skaistai, man jābūt gādīgai par sevi. Es tā kā gribēju būt tas viss tā kā sevī vienā salikt. Un tas viss manī arī tā kā tāds viens iemesls, kurš saistīts ar visu pārējo, ir ļoti, kas mani izdedzināja, ka es vienkārši tā kā, es gribēju sev kaut ko pierādīt, un es gribēju citiem būt laba. Un tas arī saistīts iespējams ir ar to, ka man bija agrāk tāds diezgan zems pašvērtējums, kāpēc es tik ļoti cīnījos un kaut ko darīju. Un pašlaik man ir tā kā daudz labāk, bet es nemelošu, ka es martā sākumā atkal pieļāvu man bija atkal tāda izdegšanas kulminācija. Es saucu tādām izdegšanas kulminācijām, jo tas ir tā, ka es atkal esmu paņēmis sev mazliet par daudz, un man marta sākumā atkal vienkārši smadzenēs tāds erors iestājās, jo es izdomāju lietas, kas man ir jāizdara, un es domāju, vienkārši 2 nedēļas, visas 2 nedēļas, un būs labi, tev vienkārši 2 nedēļas mazliet jāpacīnās. Bet tas bija mazliet par daudz, jo pa vidu šajās 2 nedēļās man bija tikšanās ar manējo psihoterapeitu, un runāšanās psihoterapeita arī nevienmēr ir viegls, jo runājam par visu kaut kādām iekšējām sajūtām, iekšējām lietām, kas ir notikušas agrāk, un daudz, kas ir tiešām ļoti, ļoti nepatīkams, ko pašai ir ļoti grūti atzīt. Un mēs ļoti aizrunājāmies, man pēc šīs psihoterapijas ieslēdzās galvā tāds diezgan liels erors, plus vēl paralēli bija visi darbi, kur jāizdara, un es aizgāju mājās un sapratu, es nevaru neko neizdarīt. Es nākamajā dienā aizgāju uz darbu, es visu dienu darbā vienkārši nosēdēju. Es tā kā vispār, es centos sev piespiest kaut ko darīt. Man tā, ka tā sajūta bija tāda, ka tev vienkārši smadzenes nestrādā. Tu to gribi, bet tu vienkārši nevari. Un es paņēmu atvaļinājumus, paņēmu nedēļu slimības lapu, un tad jau sākās šitā visa lielā koronavīrusa epidēmija. Un varbūt tas ir skumīgi, bet priekš manis laikam tas tā kā bija tieši laikā, jo man laikam bija tāds miers ļoti nepieciešams. Es esmu tā kā ļoti priecīga varbūt tagad strādājot ar mājām, jo man man tas palīdz cīnīties vairāk ar manu izdegšanu, ka man ir mierīgāks grafiks, es esmu savu dažas lietas paņēmusi mazāk, kas man ir jāizdara. Es esmu vairāk ar sevi, ar savām domām, ne ar apkārtējiem cilvēkiem, par ko es arī ejot pie psihoterapeita arī tā kā runājam, jo viņa pateica, ka es tik ļoti ātri tiku iemest tajā pieaugušo pasaulē, apkārtējos cilvēkos, un teica, ka es nemaz tam visam tā kā vēl nebija gatava, man sākumā ir tā kā sevi jānostiprina. Un jā, un tādā ziņā man tā kā šis laiks palīdz ļoti. Jā.
Paldies, ka padalījāt.
Jā, tas bija, man liekas, es par to varētu runāt arī daudz sīkāk un ļoti, ļoti daudz, bet es tādos ātros vilcienos gribēju apmēram izstāstīt, jā, kā man tas sākās un kāpēc tas sākās, jo es gribu vienkārši, lai citi cilvēki, kur varbūt sevi arī kaut ko tādu novēro, lai viņi saprot, varbūt, ka viņiem jāapstājas, jāpadomā, vai vispār viņiem tas ir svarīgi, viņiem jāiemācās runāt ar citiem cilvēkiem par savām problēmām, jo man pašai tā ir viena no tādām problēmām, ka man ir grūti būt atvērtai. Es esmu diezgan noslēgta savās jūtās, jo man jau jaunības nav ļoti liela uzticība pret cilvēkiem, un zinu, ka tā ir lieta, pie kuras man pašai ir jāstrādā, bet tas ir, es gribu tā kā iemācīties to ļoti, un es arī ļoti gribu, lai citi cilvēki, lai viņi neiziet līdz tā izdegšanai, lai viņi laicīgi jau to saprot un rīkojas vai runā ar apkārtējiem, ja kaut kas nav kārtībā.
Tas, manuprāt, ir ļoti svarīgi, ka tu tik atklāti, tik atvērti tu pastāstīji. Tikai es domāju, ka tas ir tā kā salīdzinot ar visam iepriekšējiem stāstiem, kas mums bija, ar visiem mūsu coming-outiem, kas šeit bija, tā kā Chi Laiks, ka tas droši vien ir tā kā visatklātākais stāsts tāds, bet man liekas, ka tas ir ļoti svarīgi, tā kā, jo, man ir viens jautājums, kad tu domā tā jaunajā darba vieta, tā kā, esoša darba vieta, tā kā, vai tiem cilvēkiem, kas strādā, tā kā, tev blakus, vai viņiem ir iespēja to ikdienu pamanīt, un saprast, kā ar tevim kaut kas tāds notiek, vai viņi to, tā kā ikdiena nevar redzēt un tu.
Es domāju, ka jā, ir cilvēki, kas kaut ko tādu sajūt. Es godīgi sakot, tagad, kad es esmu sākusi iet pie psihoterapeitu, es pat esmu pateikusi gan savam komandas menedžerim, gan arhitektam, ka jā, man ir izdegšanas, es izdegusi, es ar to cīnos. Es godīgi sakot, baigi nezinu, vai ir kolēģi, kur to saprot, vai arī kur to nesaprot. Varbūt to tā tik ļoti neesmu novērojusi. Jo man neviens pēc būtības neko nesaka, neko nepārmet, bet es to esmu tā kā devusi zinām uz dažiem saviem komandas biedriem. Jā.
Bet pateikt viņam par to, tas nebija nekas, tā kā, tas neizraisīja nekādas sekmes,
Pirmais cilvēks, kur mums pateica, bija mans komandas arhitekts, un viņš pateica, ka viņš grib, lai es viņam vēl kaut ko vairāk par to visu pastāstu. Tas nebija tā, ka viņš teica, ka tas ir ļoti slikti, tev vajag tur atpūsties, vai kā viņš tieši tā kā interesējās, kā man iet, kā es kaut ko tādu daru, kā tas viss izpaužas, tā kā viņš tieši gribēja, lai es ar viņu parunājos. Kad es to pateicu komandas menedžerim, viņš teica, ka tas ir kaut kas ļoti nopietns, un tev iespējams tiešām labāk tagad ir paņemt vai atvaļinājumu, vai slimības lapu un atpūsties. Tā kā tie cilvēki, kuriem es pateicu, manuprāt, bija ļoti, ļoti saprotoši, kas man patika. Jā.
Jā, un man šķiet, tas ir svarīgi, kā ar to var dalīties, un tas neizraisa nekādu negatīvu reakciju. Tas ir no vienas puses, un otras puses man arī liekas svarīgi, lai mēs visi saprotam, ka nevienmēr to var arī pamanīt, ja cilvēkam tiešām ir tādā diezgan, varbūt arī uz kaut kādu momentu akūta situācija, tas nenozīmē, ka viņš kaut kā neturās labi, un kā to tik vienkārši var pamanīt, un varbūt daudz vairāk cilvēku, nekā mēs domājam, dotā momentā, atrodas kaut kāda tāda situācija, jo es pieļauju, ka tu atnāc uz šo jaunu darbu vietu, droši vien, ka tev arī bija zināms kaut kāds enerģijas, tev enerģija bija kaut kāda plusa, ja, tā kā, un tev bija droši vien, ka kaut kāds tāds enerģijas būs, nu, dēļ tā, ka tev ir jauna darba vieta, ja, tā kā, bet tas bija kaut kur tā kā nu jā, tā kā kaut kur dziļumā, ja tev joprojām bija tas izdēgums, ja, tā kā, un to, ko cilvēki novēro, viņi novērē to enerģiju, ja, tā kā, bet viņi var nepamanīt arī, ka cilvēkam, nu, tā kā iekšēnē ir, ka, nu, ka tu saki, ka cerors, ja, tā kā rīktīgs. Jā,
tas man
nevienmēr
liekas,
mēs varam novērtēt, jā, to situāciju, jā, tā kā.
Jā, nu, tas, man liekas, katram cilvēkam izpauž citādāk, pieņemsim, tā, kad es jau esmu tāda vairāk izdegusi, es esmu ļoti, ļoti noslēgta, es īsti nevēlos runāt ne ar vienu. Es ļoti, ļoti tā kā dzīvoju tajā savā pasaulē, kas īstenībā ir ļoti, ļoti slikti, un es par to atzīstu, ka tas ir, bet man patīk, kad es to saprotu, jo, ja es to visu saprotu un zinu, kur ir tā problēma, tad es arī vienkārši zinu, ka man arī ir kādu vairāk jārunā, jābūt atklātē vai jāpadara kaut kādas lietas, kas man patīk, teiksim tā, lai mazliet tā kā, lai es justos vienkārši labāk. Bet galvenais ir, godīgi sakot, ir runāt. Un es zinu to sajūtu, kad ir sākumā, es atceros, kad ir tāds, kad es stāstīju savam kolēģim, ir īstenībā uztraukums to pateikt tieši pašam pirmajam cilvēkam, jo tu nezini, kā reaģēs. Un ja tev pirmais cilvēks tā diezgan negatīvi par tevi izturēsies, viņš būs neapmierināts, un tu nezini to reakciju. Tevī tas radīs vēl lielāku tā kā tādu, es nezinu, kā kuram cilvēkam man pieņemsim, tas radītu trauksmes sajūtu. Un jā, pieņemsim, zinu, ka vienai citai pazīstamai meitenei, viņai arī bija mentāla slimība, un viņa vēlējās ar to parunāt, teiksim, tā ar sev ļoti tuvu kolēģi, un viņai tā kolēģi tā vienkārši pateica, tu zini, ka viss tā kā, tas ir tavā galvā. Pēc būtības, jā, tas ir tavā galvā, bet ja tu jūties ļoti, ļoti tā kā draņķīgi un to kolēģis tā pasaka, tad tu to nesaproti, ka tas tā kā ir tiešām tā reāli. Tu jūties vēl sliktāk ar tādu atbildi. Tā kā, bet, nu, es īstenībā gatavojos arī uz kaut ko tādu, godīgi sakot, bet man bija ļoti, ļoti saprotoši cilvēki. Man ļoti saprotoši cilvēki darbā ir. Tā kā, man liekas, ka mums nebija tik traki. Jā, es dzirdēju, ka man viens, varbūt kāds teica, ka es tur ļoti tieva vai kā, bet es varbūt, es stāstu katram cilvēkam tik daudz, cik es jūtu, cik es varu stāstīt. Nav tā, ka es visiem varu pilnīgi stāstīt par savu problēmu, bet man ļoti patīk, ka šodien tieši varēju publiski par šo daudziem par sevi pastāstīt. Jo tas man pašai paliek, godīgi sakot, vieglāk runājot par citiem.
Tas bija tev svarīgi, jā. Jā,
tas ir man svarīgi, un es uzskatu, ka arī citiem tas ir svarīgi, jo par to ir jārunā.
Tas noteikti tā, jā. Jā, mēs jau varam redzēt, ka tev ir daži cilvēki jau raksta, ka jābūt lielai drosmei, lai atklātas un uzstāstītu. Liels paldies tev, jā, tā kā. Jā. Bet, nu jā, tā kā es saprotu, ka tā galvenā lieta, ko tu varētu ieteikt citiem, tas ir tā kā runāt par savām problēmām. Jā, tā kā nebaidīties un runāt, jā.
Jā, nu, es uzskatu, ka katram cilvēkam vienkārši ir savējais stāsts, un es uzskatu, ka katra cilvēka dzīve nav bijusi perfekta, un tas, kā mums ir bijusi dzīve, tas ir sekmējis uz to, kādi mēs esam šobrīd. Nu, par to nav jākaunas, jo katram pēc būtības varbūt ir kaut kas, no kā viņš tā kā kaunās, no kā viņš baidās. Un, ja tu to visu turi iekšā, tās visas domas viņas vienkārši tevi iznīcina. Un kā pirms tam arī Arturs stāstīja, kāds viss izpaužas, tā kā tev ir vai nu bezmiegs, tev ir ēšanas traucējumi, tev ir problēmas darbā, tu nevari koncentrēties, un tas ir tikai tāpēc, ka tu neliec sevi mazliet uz āru vairāk, tā kā tev vajadzētu, visu tur pārāk ļoti sevī. Tā kā, nu jā. Tāpēc es cenšos būt atklāta, un es arī gribu tāda būt. Jā. Tā.
Liels paldies tev.
Jā.
Liels paldies par tavu stāstu. Labi, ja kādam ir jautājumi, tad droši jūs varat vēl tā kā izmantot dažas minūtes, 1-2, lai uzdod tos jautājumus. Savādāk, paldies visiem šodien, paldies tev, Alise, vēlreiz, jā, tikai par to, ka piedalījies, par stāstu, jā, tikai, un es domāju, jā, kā tu zinām, mērē, tas bija ļoti labs papildinājums, to, ko stāstīja Arturs, jā, tā kā, un droši vien, jā, tā kā ļoti žēl, ka Arturs tu nedzirdēja, jā, tā kā, bet liels paldies tev.
Jā, paldies tev, kad atļāvi tevi man šo iespēju. Es biju ļoti priecīgi.
Ok, labi, tad, par šo es domāju, ka mēs šodien pabeigsim, jā, tā kā, es domāju, ka tāda paša formāta mēs arī tā kā turpināsim turpmāk, tuvāku laiku visdrīzāk, jā, tā kā tā būs tā galvenā un ērtāka iespēja, kā mēs varam savākties un runāt, turpināt sarunāt par šādam lietam. Bet šodien paldies visiem un priecīgus svētkus, jā, tā kā tagad 4 dienas izējams, jā, tā kā, ja vienīgi jūs varat atšķirt tas dienas no visam pārējiem nedēļas dienām. Bet paldies visiem.
Jā, paldies.
Čau.
Čau.